What's up, everyone? My name is Aly. You're listening to the latest episode of the Ear Coffee Podcast. This week, I'm glad to welcome Thor CB onto the show. Thor is a musician and curator, the founder and operator of DIY cassette label Daylily Arboretum. They are a DJ and musician who has released music under many names, and someone I've wanted to have on the show for quite some time. It was great to talk about their many endeavors, from vaporwave and sold-out tapes, nightcore and community, doing it yourself, and a lot of their music. Without further ado, here is my interview with Thor CB on the Ear Coffee Podcast. We got our beverages. Thor made it all the way here through the transit system on a Sunday when it's all red lights and nobody goes anywhere.
It's like, just... I don't even want to call it like a challenge in a negative way, but like the double whammy of Lake Street plus downtown Minneapolis. So it's like, yeah.
And I'm sure there's like some residual effect from like Hennepin being like completely closed right now, or just like things getting rerouted even a little bit. But like, hopefully that's more just over in like kind of the uptown area. Usually you just can kind of go over to Lyndale and go down that way instead of suffering too hard. But
it all sort of trickles into other areas, and then you're like, why is my bus 10 minutes late? And it's like,
yeah.
I understand.
Trickle down bus timeliness. That's
basically
more real than what Reagan was talking about. Welcome to the podcast. If you just want to take a second to introduce yourself, maybe share a couple of the monikers we're going to talk about, but we'll get into that since you do a lot of different stuff under a handful of different names, and I feel like it's all connected, but it's still distinct.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Thor, otherwise known as Thor CB, otherwise known as Karaoke VHS, DJ Overly Sympathetic, somewhat publicly known as Emulator, spelled out in kanji, and also the runner of Daylily Arboretum, a tape label / imprint.
Cool. Oh, one of those, I didn't know people, is that like an artistic moniker, Emulator, or is that just kind of like a local nickname, or like?
It was, and I guess still is, it's not like defunct or anything. I just haven't done anything with it in like a little over a year, but it's a, just another one of the like vaporwave projects that I've done, but it sort of weirdly caught on for a good minute and actually like got picked up by some of the like prominent vaporwave labels.
Oh, damn.
But it's a little bit more like ambient drone work, where it's just about like stretching out samples into like these huge ambient pieces rather than like little bits and pieces of like looped jazz or something.
Yeah, I want to hear a record that's like eco jams, but like all the songs are like 25 minutes long instead of like 4 or 6 minutes long.
Oh yeah,
like
it's out there.
I'm sure it is. Like I'm that's not a revolutionary thing to want.
Mm-hmm.
But you know that's anything kind of droney. I'm curious about. So now I have homework to do after the interview, and I always love that.
I can send you links if necessary, but one of the albums was like put out through the Daylily label, so I think it has Bandcamp links through there as well that you can follow. So whatever. Cool.
Yeah, I think only once someone had to like email me like the Dropbox to like their old stuff that we were talking about after an interview, because it was like, yeah, this shit ain't online. Like,
oh yeah,
and not for lack of reasons. Like once you get past a certain point. People don't want to bring up like this. Like, I don't want to talk about my album from 15 years ago. And in some cases, but I do. Come on. Kind of starting with your initial connection with music. I like to start any interview with an artist or a musician with those formative moments and kind of experiences they had with their art form. I'm curious to hear about what some of those first musical experiences were, what inspired you and really kind of catalyzed a love of music, since that's one thing that I think anyone that runs a label, makes music, performs, does any of the things we kind of both dip our toes in, has that like base level of just a love of music. So yeah, what inspired you? What excited you kind of when you were first discovering music just as a younger person? And kind of second part to that question is, when did you start getting involved in like online music communities? Since that's been such a huge part of some of the music that you make and just kind of the history of those genres and just what you do with Daylily and with a lot of the label stuff.
Yeah. I guess like probably the most like prominent root of things that at least I tend to consider is like when I was in like 5th or 6th grade, that's when I started getting more into like actually playing instruments. So like at the time I was playing violin, but then like took a random interest in bass guitar,
Okay.
which then turned into me like learning more like normal guitar and then like throwing vocals into there as well. And I ended up doing like the St. Paul's like School of Rock program for like a number of years, like up until like early high school. So like I met a lot of like people that are like still in like the local scene now, like through that. And that sort of like became a way of like not just like finding like a lot of music for the first time, but also like getting to be like, hey, here's what I'm really liking. We should play a song from them.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing. And then I feel like an important characteristic for me as well is like I was basically like doing some like test recordings on like 2011 GarageBand through like one of those like snowball microphones.
Yeah.
So that was like how a lot of my like first stuff was recorded when I was like 13, 14. And like to this day, I hate recording on anything other than 2011 GarageBand. So I have a dedicated MacBook that's stuck on the like OS from 2011 so that I can still use like that version of GarageBand. So
Love
like,
that.
it's tedious, but it's like when you get so fluent in something like that, like it's just as good as any other DAW.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, like in terms of like online music communities as well as just like various tape scenes and all of that, like I feel like that probably came into more prominence like when I was like 17, so like junior year of high school. I was digging around through like I was using Sputnik Music a lot for like music exploration, and like I started finding out more about like Alex G Orchid tapes at the time was like huge.
Yeah, that was the time.
Yeah, exactly. Like still probably one of the most like important like online labels in my eyes. And just started like buying tapes on Discogs. But it was a little naive because some of it was like one of the first tapes I ever bought was like the Starry Cat self-titled.
Yeah.
And like at the time, my whole thought process was like, oh, this music sounds like it was like, you know, recorded to tape and everything, which it kind of was. But I bet if I get the cassette tape, it'll sound better because it'll be like the music before it was like dubbed to tape. But it's like, no, it just sounds the exact same because that's not how it works.
It's like expecting like old school Mountain Goats records. Like, no, I'm going to listen to it on tape and the hiss will be gone.
Yeah,
no, that's
exactly.
part of it. Yeah.
It's like that it's still just being dubbed from the source, and the source is that lo-fi recording. But yeah, that's like all of that. So like Orchid tapes, Bird tapes, a lot of the stuff that was being run out of like essentially like the upper East Coast at the time was like really like my big rabbit hole into everything. And then like Vaporwave sort of followed, and that's a whole other thing.
When did those kind of explorations into those communities and just kind of ravenously listening to music and buying tapes, when did that translate to your direct involvement, whether it was even starting to dub your own tapes of your own or others' music, or trying to put out music on through some of these labels and just kind of establishing those connections a little bit more directly beyond just like being like a fan and supporter and kind of engaging in that way?
Yeah. I think it was, I was still 17 when I ended up like recording like what I would consider like my first like official album.
Which was that under the Thor CB or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was a Thor CB thing. I don't think I have it public on my Bandcamp anymore, but it's still out there somewhere.
I'm gonna soul seek it later.
Yeah, it's like soul seek, or like I like co-released it with like a Twitter friend who had like a digital label at the time called Western High, but I don't think it's called that anymore, and I don't even think they run it anymore. So I think it's still on Bandcamp somewhere, but I have no clue what the like, name of it like is anymore. But that album was called Seeing You in My Dreams, and it was just a bunch of like very moody, depressed high school shit. But that was like the first time that I was like, okay, like I'm gonna make this, and then I'm gonna have tapes made of it, and I'm just gonna like find a way to like distribute them to people. So that was like, yeah, the very first like jumping off point. But then like by the time I was in college, so like 2016, 2017, like especially being like away from home, because I was living in Chicago for college my first 2 years, like it was just all internet music scene stuff for me. So like, yeah, just getting involved with like a bunch of different like vaporwave like social groups, a bunch of different like at the time like quote unquote like bedroom pop like groups, and just like being a supporter of the scene in like any way I could, and finding like all sorts of like crazy music or physicals to pick up.
Yeah, it's like it is about who you know in a lot of cases, but it's not like kind of like the almost, I don't know what the word for it, but when like you're kind of like seeking it out with the hope of, oh, if I meet this person or connect with this person, I'll be able to have some gain. It's just, no, you care about the music, you care about the community, you engage with it that way and get to know people. And then that it's like a wholesome Ouroboros. It's not like eating its own tail, but it's like kind of still eating its own tail. But where it's just you're buying the music, making friends, and then that kind of funnels back into your own artistic creation.
Yeah, exactly.
With those early years, what sounds were you drawn to? What were you? I mean, obviously the first one was like the very moody high school kind of emotive stuff, and you know that relates.
Oh yeah.
But kind of going beyond that and into when, not still a little bit before Daylily started, but when you were at least a little bit more prolific, putting out pretty solid batch of music. And leading into the JoJo's Forever era is how it was dubbed. And like kind of segueing into that, since I think that's kind of, you've talked about that being like the first kind of period of music making that felt a little bit more definitive, or you felt kind of more confident in, you'd gotten your footing a little bit, you know. But I'm still curious to hear about that, the early kind of explorations. I love talking about that.
Yeah. Cause like, I mean, like, it all sort of in some way or shape or form like ties back into like a lot of like the early inspirations, but like a lot of what I listened to for a really long time, and to some extent like still do, is like a lot of like Sam Ray's material as Ricky Eat Acid, and a lot of like the Julia Brown material too. Not as much like the teen suicide material anymore. Like, yeah, it has its good moments, but like I feel like the real like heart of it all was in Julia Brown and Ricky Eat Acid.
Yeah,
but like,
I always like the more ambient stuff too.
Oh yeah. So like a lot of it was like, a lot of my like early experimentation with like ambient music specifically was like sort of being drawn from similar influences like Ricky Eat Acid, Blythe Field, and everything within that like quote unquote corner of like the bedroom pop scene. I hate calling it the bedroom pop scene. It's
we come up with terms for things, and they just kind of get stuck, and then that's the kind of the easiest way to describe it and have people know what you mean. So
yeah, exactly. So like one of the first like full on ambient things I put out in like, I want to say it was like late 2016 was Leaves Turn from Green to Red, which was just like a bunch of little like Casio ambient tunes that were like meant to emulate fall, obviously, given the name. But then like, I want to say like when things really started to sort of make sense for me in terms of my own like personal songwriting was the sort of tongue-in-cheek Thor CB karaoke VHS split cassette.
Yeah. I laughed when I saw that. I was like, wait. Oh, huh?
Yeah, because it was like, okay, like I have these two little like concept like projects that like were kind of being fleshed out, and I'm like, what if I just try to make it one thing? So it's like it's 50% like, yeah, just like Tascam recorded like little like cutesy lo-fi like pop songs, and then 50% like early like Laserdisc Visions-esque like vaporwave tracks. But somehow like it does genuinely work, and like it did end up getting reissued down the line by a person who like verbatim was like, oh, as somebody else who loves vaporwave and bedroom pop, it's cool to see something that's vaporwave and bedroom pop. And I'm like, exactly.
Cool.
But I feel like, yeah, like from then on, that's when I started like having a better idea of like the direction of like my own like personal styles and how I can expand upon that and make it sound like me more than just emulating some other artist or sound that like already has kind of been expanded upon in some ways.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like the JoJo's Forever era sort of began.
Well, logical next question. Let's talk a little bit about that. Since that still predated, I think some of the other things I wanted to talk about, like Lounge Lovers, like the label, and even more recent material. But yeah, as like I kind of said before, as you maybe like found your footing, kind of discovered that direction for yourself, and you know, you begin to kind of we transcend our influences a little bit and kind of start to be more confident in that. Yeah, what was that era like? What were you? Because I think that was also, I think when some like the ambient mixtapes came out, when some like the more DJ oriented stuff came out, or just when were you kind of starting to explore those avenues of your creativity that are not kind of still like artistic still, but like it's a little bit more like curatorial, a little bit more like kind of almost like sampling without sampling, because it's like just like assembling like a track list and assembling these kind of like fluid connections between tracks that sometimes are your own, sometimes are friends, sometimes are just stuff that you love and that you listen to.
Yeah, because I feel like, I mean, like I'll answer the question, but like to like extend off of that, like, because I think a lot of people sort of get caught up, especially in vaporwave, in like the argument over like whether like sampling without like rights to the samples is like ethical, or if it should even be done and all that. And I think people that get too wrapped up in that don't tend to like realize that vaporwave is much about like making music out of sounds and other music as it is also essentially being a DJ. And like that curation element is really, really important to the craft. So like in some ways it's like within like that like production, like that DJ production, mixtape production style, it like very much is like a direct extension of like that vaporwave mentality of being like, okay, like it's like everybody's like song is going to be like credited. I'm not gonna like keep that vague, but like this is as much about like putting all these sounds together into like one larger thing
and making it kind of an experience out of it, making something greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. And then essentially like I'd say like JoJo's Forever essentially started in 2019 when I moved in Tacoma with a few of my close friends, and like I was the only like musician out of the bunch, but the two others were like other like Radio K DJs with me, and we all like had experimented with just like messing around with weird like DJ mixes or nightcore remixes or anything like that. But it was like fall 2019 I put together the Corey's House EP. Corey's House is what we named the house because it was also a music venue for like 4-5 months.
Okay, only a few months.
Yeah, it was. We wish it could have gone on longer, but
was it also just called Corey's House?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like, yeah, there are some things that sort of like collapsed towards the end in terms of like us feeling like we could like confidently like house like a safe environment. Like there was only so much we could do, and some things were sort of being taken advantage of, I feel. And then plus COVID hit like 2 or 3 months after we like closed doors. So it was like, well, that wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Corey's House EP was like that was big because JoJo's All Summer was probably the main, like my most proudest like recording out of that batch of songs, which also ended up getting a bunch of like Radio K airplay.
Hell yeah.
So like it was like to a point where like at the time like it was on like the weekly hit list for like a week or two, which was really, really funny because it'd be like your top 5 songs, and then it's like Lucy Dacus, some other like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then it's like at number 4, Thor CB, JoJo's All Summer. And I'm like, oh, okay,
all right,
sure.
Take that, Matador Records. Or
Yeah, exactly. And then also a quick shout out to this guy named Ryan, who was running the tape label Feels So Real at the time. He put together the tapes for that release, and that was one of the many connections I made through that quote unquote bedroom pop scene. Mm-hmm. And so that really laid the groundwork. And then early COVID was the Dreaming of 1,000 Daylilies EP, which was put out through Photoshop Company, which is a very like niche vaporwave label that like just does a bunch of little creative like concept albums, I guess is the way of putting it. It's like all the albums are like essentially like fake like video game soundtracks, like sampled from random games or like various like vaporwave sample sources. Mm-hmm. But they were also up for putting a random like lo-fi like indie-ish release out through that mix, which was something I was grateful for.
Yeah.
And then with Karaoke Accents was put together later in the summer, very influenced by both some of the vaporwave production I'd been doing over that past year and wanting to like completely blend it in with like the Thor CB work. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like if you took the Thor CB karaoke VHS split and didn't split it. And that got picked up through Gorgeous Lights, which was probably the biggest like tape label I had worked with up until that point. And like, that was a pretty proud moment. Yeah. But yeah, within all of that, while recording all of that, I was making nightcore remixes with my roommates and just like trying to cope with whatever the hell the pandemic was. Because nothing was certain yet. Nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah, honestly, nightcore remixing is probably one of the better coping strategies I've heard of for getting through the pandemic.
Exactly.
Cool. I guess that'll lead us into talking maybe a bit about Lounge Lovers, since that was... I always hate when people say like post-pandemic, but like once things were accessible, opened up, people were comfortable and mostly safely able to go to shows and kind of have these live communal experiences again. Since that started in about 2022, I think.
Basically.
And I know Juno and Ray, but there's one other person that started it.
Yeah, Walker.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I just didn't know their name. Yeah, talk a little bit about just kind of fostering that live community since it's still ongoing. There was a show, I think, not too long ago, like within a month.
Yeah, I wasn't a part of that one, but I was there to do a performance during the Halloween show we all did. Okay, so that was my most recent one that I was able to like jump into. But
but like you know, you're still part of the collective. Yeah, kind of the core group. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk about the origins of that, some of the kind of collective goals y'all have maybe kind of been working towards beyond just the immediate of throwing together kind of more like vaporwave inspired like DJ nights and like I never know, like, it's a concert, but like it's a concert kind of makes people think one thing. Mm-hmm. It's like no one's sitting there with like their guitar necessarily, or I'd assume not. Also just some of the joys of getting to be a part of that, kind of with that communal aspect of being able to make something with friends, put shows on, and just have people show up and engage with it on that level too.
Yeah. Because, shout out to all of them. If I completely understand the timeline of things, essentially Walker, Ray, and Juno were essentially like the founders.
Okay.
And simply put, I'm pretty certain it was just a matter of like all of them discovering online that they all were vaporwave artists. And they all lived roughly in Minneapolis and didn't realize it at first. And then we're like, hey, like, we should try to do something with that.
Yeah.
Because, like,
hell yeah,
that doesn't really happen too often.
Not for Minneapolis, I would say. As much bountiful music as we may have here.
Yeah. And so they put on, like, the OG Lounge Lovers show in the basement of Cafetto. I want to say that was
hell
like,
yeah.
Yeah. And so that was like late 2021, early 2022. I can't quite remember, but I remember like seeing the flyer up in the window and then like also being told from like a few other people, it's like, wait, there's like a random vaporwave show. Did you like hear about this?
Do you know
see
about
this? And I was like, no, like what? And I ended up not even being able to go to that show. I can't remember exactly what was up, but that was a very chaotic time period anyways.
Yeah.
But like pretty much immediately after that show though, like I messaged Walker and I was like, hey, like what's going on here? Like
what's good?
Like yeah, it's like this is really exciting to see because like I've never seen anybody try to host any vaporwave type like performances or even try to like establish like a crew of people like within the Twin Cities area. And like Walker was super like excited and like I guess was like semi familiar with some of the work I'd put out in the past.
Yeah.
So like we met up and talked and like kind of formally got integrated into everything. And then there was supposed to be a second Cafetto show, if I have my memory straight. And like around that time period in like mid 2022, Cafetto was like, no, we're just not going to do these like live shows in the basement anymore. Like not just for Lounge Lovers, but just like in general.
Yeah.
Like they were getting like angry about like the amount of like graffiti in the basement it was causing or something like that.
Yeah, but also
yeah,
that's
like
the Cafetto vibe. Come on.
Yeah, it's like I'm not about to throw out like libel, but like it kind of felt like it was more of like just one of the symptoms of why they didn't want to, but that's just what they wanted to like say up front. But I mean, that just turned into like more opportunities for us to do things other places, like had shows at like Eagles. I ended up helping put together like a show in like the 7th Street entry, like which was that was a very wholesome time. Yeah. Had like the Midwest Vaporwave compilation that Walker helped host, and everybody kind of like asked a Vaporwave friend to like submit a track, and so that became like a big like 20+ song compilation, which was great. And yeah, just a very, very positive crew of people, and it's led to a lot of like collaboration that like I wouldn't have expected to be able to happen on like an actual like up close local level.
Yeah. No, definitely shout out to Juno and Raymond. Shout out to Walker as well. I haven't met them, but Juno and Ray are both friends of the pod. Cool. Yeah, I hope to make an appearance at one of these shows in the future because I've been a Vaporwave listener for a few years. I had a friend that was kind of similarly ingratiated to the a lot of like the online kind of tape scenes, and would drag me along to places and like drag me to Electronicon and like a tape swap and everything. I was like, I don't know what's going on.
Which one did you go to?
3. It was in
Okay,
Brooklyn.
the New York one.
Yeah,
The second New York one.
Yeah,
because I was at 2, which was the one in LA.
Yeah, my buddy went to 2, 3, and 4, I think.
Okay.
And then just kind of dragged me to. I say drag, but I was very excited. I had a great time, but it just on such a macro level, it was very overwhelming. And I imagine like I would enjoy something like Lounge Lovers a little bit more, since it's a little more grounded. Don't have to travel.
Yeah. It's like not to plug it too much, but like it's always a pretty chill time. Plug
it. We're here for you to plug it.
Yeah, I guess so. Because it's a celebration of like the music and the friendships, and like I don't think anybody intends for it to become like an Electronicon level like huge event or anything. So
exactly. Cool. Next, I did want to talk about Daylily Arboretum, the label that you've run for a couple of years now. Starting just when did the idea kind of appear in your mind, and when did you start making it into a reality? It's a lot of like, it's both local and non-local artists. It's some really cool archival stuff and the new stuff, whether it's comps or just like new records from people. And just also the fact that at least as of like an hour and a half ago, every tape is sold out. I don't think that recently happened, but that's still just really cool to see, and just like showing that people are engaging with this community that you've kind of formed through the label. That's not too broad of a question to take us into talking about it.
No, I can chew on it. It works. Because like I was thinking about it the other day, like just in preparation, I was like, okay, like when would I say like the idea originally like came up to like try to do a tape label? Mm-hmm. And like I literally think it was a like note on my phone that I left for myself in like 2018, where I was like, if I start a tape label, call it Daylily Arboretum. And then just like I feel like for enough of a time I was so focused in on like my own creations that like I just didn't have like the energy or like commitment to like really like double down on that and to actually start it. But then I feel like as like the JoJo's Forever era sort of like came to a close, that's when I was like, okay, like I have like that space in my mind to like actually try to make this happen. So like the JoJo's Forever comp was like technically the inaugural release, even though it was released like just through my personal Bandcamp and not like Daylily's.
Yeah.
But from then on I was like, hey, like the floodgates are open. Like if anybody wants to try to send me an idea, like go for it. Or, like if just I have a fleeting idea of asking somebody about a release, I'll do it. Because now I just can let myself do that rather than be like a bit more uptight. So like, 2022 JoJo's Forever compilation was like the very beginning of things. But then it also coincided with like just sort of a realization, especially like as once again, like things started to like open up with the pandemic, not sorting itself out, but at least becoming more manageable. I was kind of realizing like, oh, like, especially at this point in my life, like I really sort of have like fostered like a circle of creative people around me, not just physically, but also online. And it would be great for me, not just for the sake of like being able to spread that music around, but also just as an homage to those people, like gather sounds from all those people and basically create that as like the philosophy of the label, at least in terms of the curation. So like, like the second release was making some tapes for Bug Bus Piano out of New York. Big shout out Bug Bus Piano, one of like, in my opinion, the great creatives of at least like that weird, murky online ambient realm.
Yeah.
And then release number 3 was the She's Green Wisteria tapes.
Damn, I forgot about that.
And that's like I was in Portland the other week with my old roommate and like my best friend Sam, and he's also really like good friends with Teddy, the bassist of She's Green.
Shout out Teddy.
Yeah, big shout out Teddy. Always a big shout out to Teddy. But like even Sam was like, yeah, and you get to say you put out the first She's Green physical before they like blew up, and I'm like, it's true.
It's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like from then on, I'm like, I don't care like about like keeping this to one genre. Like I'm not listening to just one genre. So why should I keep the label to one genre?
Yeah.
Especially if I'm going to have to dub all the tapes by hand and monitor them.
And yep.
I should give myself some variety here. So that played a big part in things too. And then like going off of like the philosophy of the label too, and how like all of the tapes are sold out currently, I very intentionally keep the cost of the cassette tapes low because I do not want to think of the label as a business venture. I'm not trying to profit off of anything. Mm-hmm. And I want to keep the tapes at a cost that is accessible to anybody, so that the reason somebody doesn't get a tape isn't, oh, it was $15 before shipping and I couldn't afford that.
Yeah. And I think like most of them are like even available, like the downloads are free.
Yeah.
At least for a lot, if not most of them.
Yeah, exactly. And so like, and this is always the thing. And like, I can say this as the person who runs the label, like, it's like, sure, like the quantities are like relatively low. It's usually like 10 to 20 like per release. But like, if you're there, like when it comes out, those tapes don't like disappear in 1 second. Like,
no,
like your biggest excuse at that point is, oh, I forgot it came out at 5 p.m. as it always does.
Yeah.
And missed it because I checked like 3 hours late. But maybe a certain release down the line or something will justify a larger print run. But I like how things are kind of currently swinging with it.
Yeah. And I mean, as you were saying, like they're all hand dubbed. That just takes time.
Mm-hmm.
Like the run of tapes that we made that Joe did all the dubbing for, they were just sitting and listening to mixes of songs from our live sessions like over and over again. And it's even like a pretty small run, took some time to make. And so just that on a practical level is one aspect as well, beyond just the kind of the smaller community, the smaller kind of element of it. Yeah. And I appreciate you clarifying, like they didn't all just like sell out within like 10 seconds of them getting announced or something. It's not like crazy like concert ticket queues or like physicals for, I don't even know. Like something that would go so fast, but just still the fact that they have all sold out, that folks have been interested and engaged with this is still just cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about some of the archival stuff you've been able to put out, especially the Minneapolis stuff. I'm blanking on the names. I had it written down, but I forgot to take it into my physical notes. But like some of the stuff from the kind of underrated and almost seems to be forgotten sometimes, like the scene in Minneapolis of like late 90s, early aughts, like electronic music and like loop-based music.
Yeah.
Kittycraft is kind of the big one that a lot of folks know, but Pam isn't the only one making that kind of music. Wasn't the only one making that kind of music. And just as a fan of Kittycraft, it was cool to explore some of that and just find, oh, this is shit that Thor got to put out.
Yeah.
Like that was like just a serendipitous kind of realization, coming in from the outside and realizing, oh, and then just kind of thinking, oh yeah, there was a scene back then, as small as it may have been, and in the face of the kind of preeminent like indie rock and like garage rock kind of vibe that I feel like Minneapolis kind of stands with then and now in a lot of ways. But yeah, talk a little bit about that, how you found that music and kind of came to just connect with it as a listener, and then going on to put it out and making it actually available to new listeners who weren't maybe even alive or weren't living in the cities back in like 99 or 2000.
Yeah. And like for me, it literally all goes back to my discovery of the old label Slabco, which like I want to say like Kittycraft was like the first discovery in like 2019 with my roommates. Like we were all just like big into that, and when we discovered like she was local, like that blew our minds.
Yeah.
But then it's like,
because you're like, she's from LA. No, she's from here.
Yeah, exactly. And like was living here up until like, I don't know, it must have been like 2018, like 2019, like fairly recently.
Yeah, fairly recently. I can't remember from when I interviewed her, but it was remarkably recent, like well after Kittycraft wasn't putting out new music.
Yeah. And so it was like this big chain of connections, because it was like, okay, like Kittycraft, like the original Kittycraft tape was put out through the label Toy Town, which had a lot of connections with Slabco, as they kind of like, I sort of think of them as like relatives of each other, because like Toy Town was basically like the Australian equivalent of like what Slabco was doing on the West Coast.
Okay. I didn't know they were Australian.
Yeah, which is why like those tapes are even harder to find, because like you have to imagine it was like them making like 10, 15 tapes, and like half of them are in like random Australian homes, and others are just like spread out to like miscellaneous like U.S. states.
Yeah, extra grateful for the reissue they did for that early stuff.
I'm in the credits.
Yeah.
It's that was so.
Maybe I need to get that tape autographed or something. Not by but by you.
Well, and Pam will be here in a few months, or next month ish.
May or June, I don't know.
Yeah, I can't
I have tickets. I don't remember when it is though.
Yeah.
But anyways.
It was like, it's like that led to like diving into like that like Minneapolis scene, which was like Suck Patch was another like huge part of that. And I mean, I don't know if this is public information, but one of the guys in Suck Patch was very briefly married to Pam.
Oh.
Like I don't know for how long. I don't know any of the other details, but I had verbal confirmation from Chris Heidman of Suck Patch, where he was like, "Oh, my ex-wife," and I was like,
"Huh?
Oh, that is not something I would have expected, but it also makes sense given like how like everything was just sort of like bleeding into each other in terms of like that sound."
Yeah.
And so like all of the Slabco material, sort of like Suck Patch, Volume All-Star, Land of the Loops, Buckminster Fuseboard, and like a bunch of other like niche artists of the 90s sort of made up like what I almost think of as like the closest thing to like what like the late 2000s blogspot scene was.
Yeah.
Where it's like it's all word of mouth, it's all mail order, like it's
like
not
handmade
like
tapes.
Yeah,
if anything physical.
Yeah, it's like it's not like there was much like physical representation in like record stores or anything. Towards the end of Slabco, maybe, because they did eventually like transition into like CDs and vinyl. But like it just led me on this huge dive through all of this completely forgotten 90s material, and then became like, oh, it's like I haven't put out anything by Suck Patch, but like it definitely was a huge influence. And then one of the other big ones that was in that was the Busy Signals, who despite the name, it's just one guy, Howard Hamilton, but I was very, very grateful that he was up for putting together a new physical release of Baby's First Beats, which like it's just as good as anything Kittycraft ever put out, and has Pam on one of the songs.
Pam's on the song. Yeah,
it's like because like it's even if it wasn't entirely intentional, there was some sort of sonic wave going on for that brief time span, and being able to put together new tapes for that, as well as some of the other noteworthy Slabco stuff, the aforementioned Buckminster Fuseboard and Volume All-Star, like it's just special to breathe some new life into all of it.
Yeah, and yeah, not just kind of, I don't want to like gas you up too much, but like even kind of creating your own version of that, or kind of help fostering a version of that through the label, and just like with more kind of underground electronic stuff here in Minneapolis and just in general, as well as, you know, making that through line apparent and connecting it with stuff from back in the 90s and making that all kind of part of one conversation, which I think can sometimes get lost with smaller communities and like smaller kind of scenes, if we can even call them that. But you know, that's one of the coolest things I think that about what Dalo has been doing on top of just the local stuff. Because you've put out a couple releases in 2025 so far, and one was Jolie's record, and then the Mega Fortress, like kind of another archival comp. So can you talk a little bit about those? We don't have to get too into it. I do also want to talk about the karaoke VHS record.
Oh, totally. Mega Fortress has been a pleasure to work with. We originally came in contact because of the Airbird Mega Fortress split tape that I reissued, which is still probably one of the craziest like stories I'll probably ever have with the label, where like an original tape popped up on Discogs and I bought it, and then it came in the mail and it was very clearly like Sharpied on the tape, like Airbird Mega Fortress master cassette. And I'm like, this was not mentioned. And I'm like, and so I was like, wait, if this is like the source audio, I feel like I have to try to make this happen.
Yeah.
Like it was a long shot because like Mega Fortress is still like pretty low key, but like Airbird is Joel Ford, who like worked a ton with One O Tricks Point Never.
Yeah.
Has a bunch of like
Ford and Lopatin.
Yeah, the Ford and Lopatin games is the two of them as well. And has like a bunch of like really, really like solid like producer credits on top of everything. So I was like low shot, but like I gotta ask because I have this source material now.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, Joel was completely up for it. And then like he was like, well, just to make sure, we should get Mega Fortress, first name Bill, on board with things too. And so both of them were super grateful for how that turned out. And then Bill reached out like late last year, early this year, with the idea of putting out this compilation of sort of loose or forgotten tracks from like a mixture of like blog spots and tumblers from, I mean, as the title of it says, 2008 through 2012. And that's just a really cool release. It has a lot of sounds on it that like I think are sort of like the signature of like the early parts of the software label. And then Jolie's release as DJ Mojo Jojo kind of acts as like a token of friendship. It's like we've known each other for like a really long time and have DJ'd a lot of shows together, and like I feel like in the back of my head like that was something that I wanted to do for a while, and she really knocked it out of the park with the mixes she put together.
Hell yeah. Cool. Want to talk about Sympathetic VHS, since that is I think like the first album length piece of material you've put out, at least in a while, or had put out in a while. Talk a little bit about that record's creation, what inspired you to continue and kind of dive back into the music creation side of things, instead of just kind of like the curatorial tape dubbing, like all the logistical stuff, and even just like some like the live performance things you put out. Since it's like a field free in conversation with the stuff that you've reissued, and even like the earlier stuff you made, but still feels pretty singular. Just having at least listened to that more than any having gone through the back catalog. It's like very kind of decayed ambience and that kind of compositional stuff. I'd just love to hear you talk a little bit about that record, since it's a cool one.
Yeah. And it's one that I'm definitely like very, very proud of in terms of like how the actual like finished project came together. But like, it was something that had like its original like sounds or ideas brought out in just like some loose singles over the course of time. Because 2 of the tracks on it were from compilations that were put out in like 2019, 2020.
Yeah. One of them the Lalerne tapes one.
One of them was from Lalerne tapes benefit compilation. I'll always miss that label.
Yeah.
Very, very special stuff. And then the other was put out on like a dream punk compilation from No Problema tapes, who I've worked with on some other stuff. Also a phenomenal label.
Yeah, like, I get a lot of their Bandcamp emails.
Just very prolific, but with an eye for a lot of really special music. But yeah, it's like those kind of like laid the groundwork as like loose things that I had like created in the past, but like never really had like the full inspiration to like expand upon into like a greater idea. Because like the way I make music always feels really like convoluted and hard to explain, but like I've never been somebody who can like sit down and like practice or try to record on like a day-to-day or week-to-week basis.
Yeah.
And I'll just sort of like sit dormant for a while until just sort of like that sudden like divine inspiration hits, and then I just have to record everything. Like I can't let it take too long. So like it had been brewing in my head for a while that like I needed to make a more like fleshed out like ambient album that wasn't too sample based, because the emulator albums I'd been putting out for a few years were all ambient but were all samples. And so I'm like, let me make something again that like is just me sitting down with keyboards and being familiar with my instruments. And so all of it was just drawn from different like emotions or memories or feelings that were just kind of replaying in my head at the time. And then additionally too, like managed to get the thumbs up from Bugbus Piano to use some of his artwork as the main album cover, which I think ended up complementing it really, really well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. Definitely check it out. It's on, you can find it on both your Bandcamp and on the Daylily Bandcamp.
Correct.
So check it out if you are an ambient enjoyer, and if you're listening to this, you probably are, and if you aren't, don't really know what you're doing this far into the interview, but like thanks, like check it out.
Yeah, maybe you just like words, who knows.
Shout out words. Like I two things that I love: ambient music and words. There are dozens of us.
True.
To wrap things up, I like ending on the same couple questions. One is local specific, but we'll get to that. This is more of a kind of, it's almost like accusatorily been called wholesome, and I can't deny that, but that wasn't the intent. What's something that you love about your own art, your own creative work, the music that you make, what you kind of feel like you bring to the table? A little bit of kind of, wholesome introspection. It's like what you've either grown or always appreciated about the art and the music that you make and that you have brought into the world through some way or another. Yeah.
It's like trying to figure out the best way to formulate things. But I would say like I mean, at this point I think of it as like its own unique sound, and I think it does hold that merit, but that wouldn't be possible without like just sort of the behind the scenes like homage to a lot of like the really special connections and artists that like I've either had the pleasure of talking to or meeting, or just like diving into their discographies in one way or another. Because I think if you try to say that you make music without being inspired by other music or other artists, you're just kind of holding something back.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's probably the nicest way of putting it. Like almost like bullshitting a little bit, like whether you realize it or not.
Yeah. And so like all of it kind of, without a better way of putting it, is just sort of an honest expression of the time period that it was made in for myself personally. So it's like some of it may be talking or influenced by like much more external things. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, like day-to-day life in some way, shape, or form is adding up to these sounds that I'm recording or putting out there.
Yeah.
And that can take any genre, any form it wants to.
Yeah,
So,
it's not just lyrics. It's not just field recordings. These more kind of like time and place things. It's the cumulative effect of the making of the music, and it's kind of like the implaceable part of listening to the music. Since it all had to build up to that, and then you don't think, at least I feel like in the digital era, we don't tend to think about that as much. Like when you sit down and listen to something, this is accumulation of some sorts. You're thinking like, oh, I'm going to play this new track or play this new album. And I think that's something that the physicality of tapes and physical media can kind of help one, or kind of catalyze one to ponder and be conscious of as they're listening to something, even if it wasn't hand dubbed and all that.
mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Are there any things in the immediate future for either the label, any of your projects, anything you're involved in that you wanted to shout out? And then that'll kind of segue into the question I always end these interviews with. Who are some local artists and musicians, or just even DIY and underground, underappreciated artists and musicians that you want to shout out or just kind of spread the love towards?
Yeah, in some way, shape, or form. I mean, first off, how long into the future do you think this will be put out? Because
probably
I could say something that's a little bit more time sensitive, and
okay,
I'm not sure if it'll
probably. I'm gonna cut this, but I'm just looking at the calendar real quick.
Yeah.
Fucking I have too many Google Drives logged in at the same time. It might even be this month. That's 2024. Yeah, probably end of this month.
Okay. Yeah. In that case, I'll just be very transparent about it rather than discreet.
Cool.
But yeah, literally as of yesterday, finished assembling the tapes for the next Daylily release, which going all the way back to referencing like orchid tapes, bird tapes, everything from that whole corner of the US. Infinity Crush gave me her blessing to put out her 2023 album, Sistina's on tape.
Hell yeah.
So
that's cool.
Which will also be a pleasant thing, because I don't think I've put anything out on the label that is that like distinctly just like, you know, like a normal like band composition where it's vocals, guitar, drums, bass.
Yeah.
Like unless you count She's Green.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, that was really cool to see her be down with that, and she expressed her excitement for the tapes. So still got some work to do to make sure they're like ready to like get announced and everything, but by the time this comes out, they'll probably be out, and if you got a tape, I hope you enjoy it. But
if there's any left, you know, act quick.
exactly. But that's a very slept upon release. It extends out from her previous work into some genre and sound territories that I don't think she'd really worked in up until that point. So it's a little breath of fresh air.
Oh,
but
yeah.
the door is always open. It's like, I mean, it's always dangerous saying this as a label, but like submissions are always open. It's like, I may not respond, but I will at least read your email, check out a song or two. And yeah, beyond that, it's really all just concepts right now. Yeah. So, but yeah,
Infinity Crush's
album
to put form
is the
to
main
that
thing.
this far in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even do it. It's like,
good.
Yeah. My brain just doesn't operate like that, where like, I can't just be like, oh yeah, I'll book you out for like 4 months from now and then work on it like, you know, a couple months from now. It's like, if we've agreed upon something, I'm trying to work on that within the month.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can be understanding, I can be flexible, but it's like, I can't let that like energy or motivation slip away from me. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And then just any like local shout outs for just bands, artists, unrelated or related to Daylily, artists you've collabed with, or just people you're fans of. Like whether even if we hadn't mentioned She's Green at this point, then that would have been like a good example. But like just giving the listeners some recommendations, giving me selfishly some recommendations, but also just like shouting out the homies is kind of what we call this portion, the local music homie shout out corner.
Yeah. I mean, like people that have already been mentioned, like shout out to everybody affiliated with Lounge Lovers. So not just Walker, Ray, Juno, but also like Visa Card, Ioto, they don't make music, but Kale.exe, excellent visual artist. Shout out Mustafa.
Shout out Staff.
Staff. I gotta make sure Staff gets mentioned.
I'm gonna put them on blast real quick. Yesterday, for no reason, they just texted me the phrase shoegaze Bob Dylan. There was not a prior conversation to which it related, besides I guess just shoegaze and Bob Dylan, and then like. They texted me that when like I was driving, and then they were getting on my ass for not replying fast enough. I'm like, dude, I was driving. What do you want me to do? Like, it's not like it was like a help. I'm dying and I need assistance. It's just shoegaze Bob Dylan. And so I just wanted to share that since you brought up stuff.
Got a million stories like that.
Yeah, I'll leave y'all with that. Consider shoegaze Bob Dylan.
Oh yeah. hard to top that. Shout out to Brock, aka Blair Allaire. They were on the Daylily compilation that I put out at the end of 2024. Used to live in Minnesota, now they live in Chicago, but I still count them as local. Same as Sam, the best friend I mentioned earlier, also known as DJ Cold Turkey, my Nightcore DJ compatriot. Formerly lived in Minnesota, now lives in Portland. God, like there are always so many various random names that could come up.
Yeah, it's never meant to be comprehensive. Like I've had people like pull up their Spotify or their Bandcamp. So I think Melon Herpes prepped a list. And shit like that. So it's just like whoever kind of comes to mind in the moment. And yeah, and we can go as long or as short as we need to, but you know, it would go on forever if we were trying to even approach the comprehensive.
You're making me want to pull up like the recent editions and stuff. Also, shout out Bug Bus Piano again. Gotta give that shout out. They don't know me, but I'm really fucking with what they're doing lately. Shout out to the Seattle label Bug Tech.
Okay.
Just a lot of good experimental electronic tones. They put out a compilation like a month or two ago, 3 months ago, that I still am giving a lot of listens to.
You have been listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share so we can stand out against the sea of other music podcasts. You can find information and other important links in the show notes of this episode. If you would like to support us, please consider subscribing on Patreon for early access to live sessions and other bonus content. You can also subscribe to our Substack for a regular newsletter with reviews, ramblings, and anything else we have to say. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.